The Chihuahua Desert was once a vast grassland of North America, but after more than 100 years of degradation, the land became hardened and almost unable to retain water. To restore this declining ecosystem, scientists reintroduced bison. Once numbering in the tens of millions across North America, bison were hunted to the brink of extinction by the late 19th century. Their disappearance contributed to the decline of many grasslands, turning once rich ecosystems into increasingly dry and lifeless areas. Weighing up to 1 ton and requiring large amounts of food every day, bringing them back into such a water-scarce environment seemed like a risky ecological experiment. But scientists believe that this once-lost species could be the key to restoration. What happened next amazed the world. What makes bison one of nature's most powerful ecosystem engineers? Stretching across northern Mexico and the southern United States, the Chihuahua Desert is one of the harshest environments in North America. Summer temperatures often exceed 40 degrees Celsius, rainfall is scarce, and prolonged droughts make it a challenging place for most animals to survive. Yet for thousands of years, this region was part of a vast grassland ecosystem that supported enormous herds of bison. With an estimated population of 30 to 60 million animals, the sound of their hooves thundered across the plains, and their massive migrations helped shape the entire grassland ecosystem. However, everything changed in the 19th century. Commercial hunting, the expansion of transcontinental railroads, and westward settlement caused the bison population to collapse from tens of millions to fewer than 1,000 animals. And as the bison disappeared, the grasslands that had evolved alongside them also began to decline. Many animal species gradually vanished, while landscapes that were once full of life became increasingly dry and barren. In 2009, a truck left Wind Cave National Park in South Dakota, carrying some of the last genetically pure bison in North America. Their destination was the Llanos Biosphere Reserve in Chihuahua, Mexico, a place once dominated by their ancestors, but now reduced to dust and dry grass after more than a century without them. Why were the bison from Wind Cave chosen? Most modern bison have been crossbred with domestic cattle, a legacy of past attempts to save the species through captive breeding and uncontrolled hybridization. But the Wind Cave herd was different. Genetic testing confirmed that they were completely pure, retaining the wild instincts, migratory behavior, and ability to interact with grassland ecosystems just as their ancestors had done for hundreds of thousands of years. This was a critical requirement because only these original versions had the potential to restart an ecological engine that had long been shut down. But you may be wondering, why exactly 23 animals? In conservation biology, a founding herd must be small enough to manage, yet large enough to maintain a minimum level of genetic diversity. For that reason, 23 was considered an appropriate number. These bison were effectively dropped into a harsh and unforgiving landscape, where temperatures could range from below -20 degrees Celsius to over 50 degrees Celsius. Armed with only one weapon, the survival instincts forged through hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. There is one fact that most people misunderstand. This is not a story about bringing a desert back to life. Llanos was never a true desert. Before bison were wiped out, it was part of the Great North American Grassland, a vast semi-arid prairie stretching from Canada to Mexico. What we see today is the remnant of an ecosystem that was gradually destroyed. To understand why that matters, consider a simple comparison: domestic cattle and bison. Both are large grazing animals. Both have hooves. Yet the way they interact with grasslands is completely different. Domestic cattle tend to gather around water sources, remain in the same areas for long periods, graze plants down to the roots, and trample the soil until it becomes hard as concrete. They are essentially soil compacting machines. Bison do the opposite. They can travel dozens of kilometers each day, feeding mainly on the tops of grasses rather than pulling them out by the roots. Their hooves churn and loosen the soil instead of compressing it. If cattle are like bricks pressing down on the land, bison are living plows. One slowly degrades the landscape in silence, the other continuously helps regenerate it. That is why bison cannot simply be replaced by any other grazing animal. If there were only one image that could explain the entire miracle of Chihuahua, it would be the deep footprints left in the ground. Each bison, weighing between 500 and 900 kilograms, concentrates its weight onto 4 sharp hooves, creating pressure of hundreds of pounds per square inch, comparable to a small industrial drill. One step is like a strike of a hoe. But what truly changes the game is the frequency. Each bison travels 10 to 20 kilometers every day, and the real power does not lie in a single footprint, but in millions of them. Every day the herd moves continuously across the grassland, repeatedly driving their heavy hooves into the ground. Over time, the hard crust that had built up for more than a century begins to crack apart, as if the entire landscape were being plowed again by a giant army created by nature itself. Those cracks do more than just break apart the hardened surface. They also function as natural funnels for water. When rain falls, instead of running off and evaporating, the water flows through millions of tiny openings and penetrates deep into the soil. Water infiltration rates in areas where bison are active are 3 to 4 times higher than in areas without them. Water is no longer a destructive force. It becomes a source of life. And from that water, seeds that have remained dormant for decades begin to awaken. Microorganisms multiply, and the soil gradually transforms from a lifeless concrete-like surface into a loose, breathing environment. It all begins with a single footprint, repeated millions of times, turning these giant animals into the most diligent plowmen that nature has ever created. If a bison's hooves are a plow, then its entire body is an excavator. And the greatest structure it creates is not a crack in the ground, but tiny ponds built with nothing more than gravity, instinct, and flesh. It all begins with a behavior that seems meaningless: dust bathing. To clean their fur and cool themselves down, bison kneel, roll, twist, and dig with their horns and massive bodies, leaving behind shallow depressions 2 to 3 meters wide and 20 to 40 centimeters deep. When the rainy season arrives, these depressions turn into thousands of natural water basins. In the middle of a harsh desert, each small pool can hold water for weeks, attracting microorganisms, aquatic insects, amphibians, and birds. In just a single rainy season, what was once a lifeless dust wallow becomes a complete miniature ecosystem. And the most remarkable part is that a single bison does not create just one wallow. Throughout its lifetime, it creates thousands of them. Multiplied across generations, the total number of natural water reservoirs formed by bison in Chihuahua is beyond counting. A vast network of water-retaining habitats that helps bring life back to places once thought beyond recovery. Another amazing thing is what bison leave behind every day. The closest thing to a perfect fertilizer that grasslands could ever receive. Each adult bison produces about 10 to 12 tons of manure every year, roughly equal to its own body weight. It is like a mobile factory that needs no electricity and no maintenance. But the real value is not in the quantity, it is in what is hidden inside. Bison manure is packed with nutrients, and more importantly, thousands of native grass seeds that pass through the digestive system intact. This is an evolutionary design refined over hundreds of thousands of years. A bison's digestive fluids are strong enough to weaken the hard outer coating of seeds and break their dormancy, but not strong enough to kill the embryo inside. As a result, every pile of manure becomes a perfect germination capsule. The seeds have already been prepared for growth and are wrapped in a moist, nutrient-rich package. These manure piles often end up in hoof prints and dust wallows, the very places where the soil is loosest and water remains the longest. Bison do not simply spread fertilizer. They place it in the right location, at the right time, using a formula that millions of years of evolution have tested and refined. While humans spend millions of dollars on seed-spreading aircraft and chemical fertilizers, with much of it failing, bison accomplish the same task simply by walking, grazing, and leaving manure behind. That is why people say that bison do not just plant grass, they plant the future of the grassland. There is a comparison often made by ecologists when discussing the Chihuahua Project, the story of wolves in Yellowstone. In 1995, 14 gray wolves were reintroduced into Yellowstone and made history. The wolves controlled the elk population. The elk stopped overgrazing the riverbanks, vegetation recovered, and the rivers themselves changed course. It became a classic example of a cascading chain reaction, where a top predator reshapes an entire landscape. But there is a crucial difference. Yellowstone already had water, forests, and soil. The wolves only had to fix one broken link. In Chihuahua, however, bison were released into a place where even the most basic foundations of the ecosystem had already disappeared. They are not repairing. It is regeneration from zero. And the most surprising part, the first species to return was not eagles or wolves, but dung beetles. These silent sanitation workers were drawn to tons of fresh manure, rolling small balls of dung into the soil and carrying nutrients down to where plant roots could absorb them. Then prairie dogs appeared, digging underground labyrinths that became channels for water and oxygen. Burrowing owls took over their abandoned nests. Coyotes began to patrol the area, and finally golden eagles returned to the skies over Chihuahua after years of absence. We still believe that planting forests is the best weapon against climate change. But forests store carbon in trunks and leaves, parts that are easily burned and released back into the atmosphere as CO2. Grasslands are different. Around 80% of their carbon is stored in deep root systems, 2 to 3 meters underground, safe from any wildfire. When bison graze the tops of grass, the plants respond by shedding part of their roots to rebalance themselves. These dead roots decompose into organic carbon and become locked in the soil. The plants then photosynthesize more strongly, absorb more CO2, and grow new roots. Every time a bison lowers its head to graze, carbon is effectively pushed from the atmosphere down into the ground. Data from Chihuahua has shown that soils in areas with bison contain significantly higher levels of organic carbon compared to areas without them. Meanwhile, the world continues to spend billions of dollars planting trees on barren land, where up to 70% fail to survive. The solution is not forcing plants to grow where they do not belong, but restoring the native ecosystem engineers. These are carbon-absorbing machines that nature has tested for hundreds of thousands of years, requiring no fuel, no maintenance, only a chance to return home. From the first individuals, the bison herd in Llanos grew to more than 200 animals, a proof that what once seemed impossible had, in fact, succeeded beyond expectations. But the significance of Llanos goes far beyond numbers. In 2020, 19 bison from Llanos were transferred to the El Carmen Conservation Complex in the state of Coahuila, creating Mexico's second conservation herd. Llanos officially became a source population, a living genetic bank for the entire country. And from Mexico, the wave has spread far beyond. In Belgium, the Bison project is preparing to reintroduce European bison in 2027. In Romania, the herd in the Sarcu Mountains has surpassed 100 individuals, restoring mosaic forests and high-altitude grasslands. In Poland, more than 2,800 European bison now roam freely, a result that would have seemed unimaginable just a century ago. From Banff in Canada to the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana, from Siberia to the Netherlands, the same principle is being applied, bringing back the lost ecosystem engineers. The lesson from Chihuahua is no longer an isolated experiment. It has become a blueprint for a global movement. But success always comes with a paradox. As the bison herd expands, the pressure on the very land it has just restored also increases. Young vegetation begins to be threatened by the very engineers that created it. To continue growing, they need more space. But that space no longer exists. Thousands of years ago, their ancestors migrated freely with the seasons. Today, those routes are cut off by highways, barbed wire fences, and a massive border wall. For the first time in evolutionary history, a one-ton force means nothing against a landscape fragmented by human design. Trapped, the bison spill onto private land, where they are seen as a threat. Ranchers fear water loss, disease transmission, and broken fences. a fear that reveals how much we have forgotten how to coexist with large wild animals. Conservation groups are working to purchase land and create ecological corridors. But land is finite, and every hectare comes at a cost. The biggest question remains unanswered. Are we truly willing to give space back to nature? Or will the miracle of Chihuahua remain a single green island, isolated in a vast ocean of concrete and barbed wire? Chihuahua is not a miracle. It is a reminder that nature has never needed complex machines or billion-dollar solutions to heal itself. It only needs the missing pieces to be returned. Bison do not create anything new. They simply return, and in doing so, they bring back an entire web of life, from insects and birds to grasslands and rivers that had disappeared. The greatest lesson is not about the bison, it is about us. Sometimes the best way to save this planet is not to intervene more, but to learn to step back, give space, and let nature's greatest engineers do their work. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to Mandarin Tech to continue exploring the extraordinary stories that are quietly unfolding around us.